Well, welcome back. We are the Law and Crime Network. I am Linda Kenny Bodden, and this is the afternoon session. And boy, do we have a docket for you coming up, and guests that you will not believe, and you will have to stay tuned to find out who they are. Well, that was the important interview that may be important for a number of reasons the defense contends, because they contend this was a false confession. Let me introduce my guest for today, starting with in the studio here, Anthony Tall, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you try cases, you represent sports figures. You are, I've been reading your sites. It's unbelievable everything you do. Thank you for being on with me again. A pleasure to have you here. And we'll be with you in a bit.
Okay.
And then, of course, Judge Ashley Willcott, you know her well from Georgia. Judge, how are you? You are my font of information when it comes to anything regarding any trial that has to do with any child, baby, juvenile, anything. Thank you, Ashley, for being on, one of my favorite guests of all times.
Thank you, Linda. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and of course, my forensic pathologist for the day, Dr. Jamie Downs, who has been the head forensic pathologist in 2 different states, is one of the fountains of information that I go to when I can't use my husband because of some kind of conflict of interest, or maybe because he's in Poland or across the seas. Jamie, I love you, but not as much as Michael.
I certainly understand that, and the feeling is mutual. Good to see you, Linda.
Nice seeing you. Now, I'd like to start with you, Dr. Downs. There's been the big bone of contention in this case is, has the state proven how this child has died? The defense contends it was a stillbirth. I had an expert on here yesterday who said it was either a stillbirth or an unsurvivable child. In other words, it would live for a second or two, but not breathing, and then die. You are the forensic pathologist in this case. Don't you want to do a forensic pathology examination to confirm whether or not what a defendant is telling the attorney, not the attorneys, but the police, may be the truth?
Well, as a forensic pathologist, your first mission is to be objective and to gather evidence, whatever that evidence is and wherever it might take you. So I would personally want to not only do an examination of the remains, but I would do an autopsy of the scene. I learned a long time ago from one of the greats in our field, Joe Davis, in Miami, that everything begins at the scene. So that's where it needs to start.
Well, here they went to the police to a forensic anthropologist because there were bones, and as you and I both know, the anthropologists deal with bones, not necessarily tissue, okay? And the forensic anthropologist made a fatal mistake of the bones were burned, and therefore the police went off on this tangent. How does that affect you as a forensic pathologist in coming up with the cause of death?
Burning of bones doesn't really affect me in terms of cause of death. I would want to see the remains for myself, and you have to remember that because you have skeletal remains, that doesn't necessarily mean that the cause of death was burning or the burning happened immediately after death. In fact, I would expect flesh remains not to burn down to bone necessarily. A small set of remains, like a newborn child's remains, should burn rather easily if there actually is burn damage.
So, Dr. Downs, we'll continue this discussion, and we're going to bring my other 2 guests into it. But basically what I think I just heard you say is that you really want to see for yourself and come to a conclusion for yourself on something that's not contaminated. Let's go to a break, and we'll be right back. Stay with us. Okay, so to me this is very troubling, Judge Willcott, especially when the state has the burden of proof. Your forensic pathologist says, well, I looked at all of her statements, which we know may be contaminated, may be a false confession, and given everything, I came up with the conclusion that it's homicide by violence, but I don't know what from. Are you bothered as I am?
Sure, because you want to hear a cause of death, right? And you would think if a prosecution's going to try a case that they're able to say through an expert what the cause of death was. Well, she specifically just said the opposite. I don't know what the cause of death is, but I do know it was, the exact cause, but I'm going to conclude it was homicidal violence. That's a big point for the prosecution, for the jury.
A big point for the prosecution, Anthony, with the judges a big point in problem, big point, yeah. I see problem. What do you say?
Yeah, I say the same thing. I don't see how she can make that jump. First of all, she's a forensic expert, and she's basing something on statements and linguistics. So that's a problem right there. And secondly, she's saying, looking at all the evidence, the fact that there was evidence that she tried to conceal it. People try to conceal things for a whole bunch of reasons. Guilt, shame, maybe she felt a little guilty. That does not point to her committing a homicide. So as a defense attorney, usually what you have to do in these situations, you take a molehill and you make a mountain out of it. That's one of these molehills that she gives that we can make a big mountain and go miles and miles with that. She did not give an actual determination as a forensic expert as to the cause of death. That's huge.
Well, let's see what the defense expert forensic pathologist, Dr. Levon, said earlier today. Well, that's Dr. Levon saying he can't determine a cause or manner of death. But I just want you to note something when we talk about false confessions. There, Mr. Rickers, Sr., asked him, did you have an opinion that was different, basically, than Dr. Allen? And then the witness, who is an expert, adopts it and said, yeah, my opinion is different. I want to let you know that they were talking about Dr. Susan Brown, who was the forensic pathologist. So if you want to know how false confessions happen and think people adopt things that people say, that was a good example. Anyhow, Dr. Jamie Downs, I do know your name. Medical certainty, reasonable degree. I find that a troubling fact anymore, because what is medical certainty if you're relying on people's confessions that may be wrong, or statements, or what the police tell you?
As a physician, our first tool is history. It would be malpractice to ignore history. Part of that is statements. But you also, when you're listening to a statement, you have to consider what the individual said and were there leading questions. And also, you have to be very careful not to hear what you want to hear. I remember a homicide case I had here locally where the police insisted that the victim said before she died that she had seen herself shot in the stomach. Actually, that's not what happened.
Dr. Downs, you are a fount of information based on your history, and I know that next week when we watch the Granville Ritchie case, we may be seeing you, I gather, as a witness for maybe the prosecution, maybe the defense. I don't know yet. We'll find out soon. But I really want to thank you for whatever you do whenever you come on and give us your knowledge. Let me ask Judge Willcott, if you have Dr. Downs on the stand, and Dr. Downs is asked about medical scientific certainty and then talks about history and what other police officers told him, would you then be susceptible, let's say, to a defense motion to strike his opinion?
No, I mean, I wouldn't. And sometimes I've seen some do that, but honestly, because he's relying on that history, because his expert testimony is really not that different from the state's expert, I wouldn't. I would let it go. I just don't think that type of motion is going to be won in this particular case, because they relied on everything that was at their disposal, everything that they could rely on, Linda.
Anthony Tall, so you are defending this case, and you have these two expert opinions, but they both say they can't determine the cause of death. Why is your doctor more important to the jury, because you have to explain that he is, than the state's doctor?
Because I don't have the burden of proof. The prosecutor has the burden of proof. If my guy is saying it's uncertain, she's saying it's uncertain, so we're both at uncertainty. They have a burden of proof to a high degree, beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm just saying it's up in the air, and if you're going to convict this young, pretty girl, you're going to need some evidence that's pretty certain in a case like this.
Well,
I've done these cases. I've had young girls, and when they're young, it's hard to prosecute them.
Well, we're going to see about that. Dr. Downs, I really want to thank you for joining us for this half hour. I hope that we have a longer time with you, and I hope that you will come back after the Granville Ritchie case on the Law&Crime Network. We have to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be doing more about this case, and we have an expert in false confessions, a real expert who was a victim of one. Stay tuned.